Okay, it's October the 16th, Sunday morning. I'm looking over filming Man's Shoulder, 11 a.m. And the reason I'm making this film is for myself and others, for my children, my grandchildren, all the future generations, and anyone else that's interested. And what I want to do is interview a man named Mr. Jack Stewart, who was born in Harewood, here in Nanaimo, and he's 90 years young. And this man knew my grandfather. Now, my grandfather, old Johnny Gogo, um, I did not know him. He died when I was 3 years old, and I do not remember him. I just remember when I was a little child, there was this man sitting in a wicker chair, and it was a cane and his hands on the cane. And I guess I was looking up at him, and that's all I remember of him. And he's a hero of mine because he came here from wherever he came from. That's always been not exactly known where he came from. Some say Austria, some say that he was Ukraine, some say part Cossack. And my brother Ron, who passed away 2 or 3 years ago, once told me the story that when he was a little boy in Harewood, there was an old lady there, an old ethnic lady, and she said, "Ronnie Gogo, you come over to my house and I'll tell you all about the village your grandfather and your people came from." But of course that didn't interest him. It's always amazed me that some children have absolutely no interest in their heritage whatsoever. My son David really does. He's very much into that, very much into the old mining days. He's got a tremendous collection, thanks to Jack and others, of old mining lamps and paraphernalia he's got there. But what I like to do today is interview Jack and the best of his recollection as to my grandfather and my father and my mother's brother, old Rolly Wardle. So Jack, what do you remember about my grandfather, old Johnny?
Well, I found him very calm. He was always interested. I would be about 12 years old when we first met him, or maybe a little younger. We would come up and we were on our bikes and we'd go to South Fork Dam and fish, and we'd stay there overnight and then bring back. But coming through, we had to open the gates to get through. That was his. We had to cross his land. It was private. So we had to open the gates and made sure we closed them, and then he had to stop and give us a cup of tea. Always a cup of tea. I couldn't figure out why. But he was pumped. There would be maybe three of us kids or two of us kids, and he was pumping us for information. What happened? What's happening in the town? What's there? Because this was a real outcast of a place. It was a long way out of the Nanaimo, and I would suggest it would take us an hour to get up the hill, because we had packs on the bikes and everything else. So when we got to the top of the hill and turned down to South Fork Road, it was all downhill. So we were rested by the time we got to Gogo's place. You must remember, this was all big timber. There was all timber through here. And at that time, they had built the South Fork Dam, and they were putting in a new pipeline from the South Fork Dam. There used to be a wooden dam up there, and the wooden stave pipe all the way into the Nanaimo. And they were putting concrete in, so the city crew left the gate open several times. So he then in turn told them that they couldn't cross his property. They had to make a road around his property, and they had to do that. They couldn't come through. So we used to still come through his property and talk to him and get a cup of tea. Always made us a cup of tea. Always enjoyed our company anyhow. And when he went into town, he didn't go to town, he went to Extension, and he rode a horse into Extension and back again. And when I worked with them here, I worked up here about 4 weeks or so, and he always come around with his horse and seen how we were doing and talked to us. Very nice man, very big man though. He was big like
Kenny?
Yeah, no, he wasn't fat. He was thin and very wiry, but big hands on him. I always remember the hands, just twice the size of mine. But a very gentle man, very gentle. At least that's the way I look at him. And your dad was the same way. Very easy gentleman.
like me.
You're an ornery old bugger.
You know, speaking of leaving the gate open, of course, what would happen then is cattle would get out. And once they got out in that
Yeah.
big timber and that, you never get it back. About 40 years ago, we had the Army open a gate in the back of this property. And they came through, and there was X many soldiers there, and they let the gate open. We had a few cattle get out of there. So they came along the second time, and I was there with 3 or 4 of my brothers, and we raised hell with them about that. And they got kind of mouthy, so we kicked the shit out of them. And we took their guns, and we took the barrels, and we put them in the reach of this trailer, and we jumped on the guns, and we bent the barrels. They were like this, their barrels, and they were all pissed off. And they went to the RCMP, and they were going to raise hell with us and everything else. And we went to Dave Stupich, who was the MLA at the time, and he really raised hell with them and told them to keep the hell out of here. And they had to compensate us for the loss of the cattle because, you know, they come marching through a place. They're ignorant as hell. They come through and just open something and leave the gate open. And a lot of these guys are city boys. They don't know any better, but we sure as hell, the Army's supposed to fight for us, not against us. So do you remember old Rolly? My
Yes.
mother's brother, he was a character.
Oh yeah. He was chasing on the machine, and your dad was the operating engineers, and there was I can't think of the hook tender's name now.
Balance?
Clarence Balance. So I would be out there setting. There was 2 of us out there setting the chokers, and the rigging would come back, and it would be all tangled up. It would take us 5 minutes to untangle the rigging to set the chokers, and then blow the whistle to go in. So when your dad went to the bathroom, or your uncle would take over the controls, and he would go at a slower speed and hold the rigging up so we'd get more logs than when he was operating. But your dad wanted to highball it back.
So you got the old pops. He got the rigging back to the crew to set chokers fast, but they were so tangled it took longer than if you'd tight lined it back.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You know, it's kind of funny that people get into those bad habits. My brother Kenny, you know, he was a character, and I logged with him for about 12 years. Him and I were partners, and he used to load this logging truck with a track loader, and he'd always try to put one extra log in the grapple, and he'd fiddle with that. He's a hell of a good operator, but he'd fiddle with it and take more time by trying to get an extra log in that grapple than if he'd just taken a smaller amount.
Yeah.
Like, I've been running that 950 cat for about 45 years now, and too much is always a bad thing. One will slip out of the grapple, and then you got to back up and drop the whole grapple full, and you know, it doesn't pay to take any more than the machine can hold. It's just a waste of time.
Well, I can remember it was time to swing the blocks on the machine, and I was hired as a high rigger to swing the blocks, and so I left Northwest Bay. I was second rigging there, and I come here. It was a shorter drive because we had to drive they didn't no transportation. You had to take your own car. So I got a job up here as a rigger up here. So come time to change the blocks, so it was kind of a haywire. They pulled me up with the tree with the car, a Buick car, a brand new car. He goes in reverse and pulls me up to the pass line block, which is the main block on top of the tree. He tried to pull me through the pass line back. No one's watching. I'm hollering and screaming my head out. Anyhow, they stop, and I get out of the pass line, and I go down, and I swing the haulback block around the tree, and I'm going to swing the main line block through the tree. Well, the strap was too tight. It was really tight. So and the car couldn't lift the block. So I'm trying to swing. So I says, "You're going to have to put the machine on the thing. I'm not that damn car." Nope, he was determined. "You can swing it with a car." I says, "I can't. I only weighed about 160 pounds then." So anyhow, this block was 2,000 pounds. So anyhow, I come down, I says, "You got to put the machine on it." "Nope, I'm not putting the machine on it." So I'll go get the other riggers. So there was a logging camp just up the street, up the road about 2 miles or so. And that was a Rika sawmill that we're in there logging. So he went up there and got Johnny Smythe. Smythe is his name. Smith with Smythe they call him. He's a German. And he went up the tree and they pulled him up and, with a car. And then he's trying to pull it. And he says, nope, you're going to have to put the bloody machine on it. So anyhow, he finally put the machine on to lift the block. For the strap was too tight. So he said, you come up here. See, two of us up here were trying to push that block around. We couldn't push it around. So we had to take the block, lower it down, swing the strap around, and then bring the block back up and put the pin in it. And that was me. That was the end of my logging it. Mike Gogo's, or Johnny Gogo's. I went back to Northwest Bay where they had proper equipment on and went back there. It cost me a little more money, but it was a much safer job.
Yeah, well, he couldn't manhandle that 2,000-pound block. I don't know what's the matter with him, but tell us about the old days when people were, fatally injured in the woods, the Chinese people, and the habit of leaving with all their tools and just walking off and never coming back.
Yeah, that happened to me twice at Buck and Turner's. I was blowing whistles up there, and it was a rainy, stormy day this day, and the wind was blowing pretty hard. And I was sitting up on top, and I could look down into the ravine where they were falling. On the other side, they were logging, the crew. So I seen all the Chinamen going up the hill, and I looked down and I could see this one Chinaman laying on the ground, but they just went up the hill and walked past the machine, never said nothing. So I thought, there's that guy's still laying on the ground. So I stopped the rigging and I blew 7 whistles, which was for a stretcher. So the hook ender, what's the matter? And I says, you better go and look at there's a Chinaman down over there. So they went down, and the Chinamen were doing all the falling, and it was all by hand, hand saws. So anyhow, they went down, and here this Chinaman went. So they sent the stretcher down there and packed him up, and the Chinamen all left. They never come back. So they had to get a new crew. And 4 weeks later, well, what happened to the Chinaman? A limb broke off the tree and come down. He was wedging the tree, and it broke and come down. So they, about 3 weeks later, the same thing happened again. And they all leave. The whole works of them leave. And they don't pick him up or nothing. They just leave him right where he lays. So we had to go down and pick him up. Well, I didn't, but the crew went down and picked him up and brought him out. And another time, when I was working at Northwest Bay, we were going to strip the tree, and I was waiting for the last turn to come in. And this fella was standing on the boom haulback line that swings the boom back and forth. It was a hay rack boom. And he was standing in the line, and the turn come in and hit that line, and he was standing on it, threw him up and pitched him onto the fairleads of the machine, killed him. They left him on the side of the road, picked him up, left him on the side of the road. At the end of the shift, they put him in a gravel truck and took him down. There was no first aid or nothing them days. No hard hats, no nothing.
Pretty unceremonious.
Yeah.
You want to tell them about the old coal mines that Grandpa had, and how the big companies tried to stifle them?
Oh yeah, they mined, extension mine went under this property, and mined is closed. He knew about it because he worked in the mine. So he was trying to sue the company for the coal they took out of here. So he done several mines here, and they would get close to where they would get in maybe 30 or 40 feet, and then company men would come in here and blow it up. He done 4 that I know of that he blew up. The last one was down by just past the pumping station at the Nima River for the prime the pump for the line up the hill. And that's the last one I know. It was just there was a city had a cabin there on the river where the pump was.
So the major mining companies would sabotage Grandpa's attempts to start up his own mines.
Yeah, well, all he was doing was getting to hit one of their tunnels, and then he could sue them.
Could prove that they
Yeah,
had gone
yeah.
underground and
He
taken
knew
it.
they had done it, but he couldn't prove it, so he had to get proof.
Well, you probably remember this much more than I did, but in Chase River they have a stop there called Stark's Crossing.
Yeah.
And it was named after a black fellow named Starks. And the legend has it, like I say, you remember better than I did, that he actually discovered a major coal seam and on his own property. And next thing you know, he was found at the bottom of the cliff dead. So, either he was very unlucky at viewing over a cliff or somebody shoved him over. And in any event, it wasn't long before these companies had his property, and it was 99% chance he was murdered.
Yeah, but this is one of the only companies, land that I know that had exclusive mineral rights. All the other companies just, there was no mineral rights. This was the only piece of land that I knew
Well,
of.
apparently, according to my dad, as best I best can recall, my grandfather knew some old Russian judge, Russian man that could speak Russian. He was a judge in Victoria and a lawyer, and he used to confer with him. And somehow he got the rights, the underground mineral rights to this property. Like you say,
Yeah.
that's very rare because in the E&N land tract, they got it all. They had it all. So if he could, like you say, if he could prove, but if he could have proved it, he could have sued them for a fortune. But my grandfather sold the timber rights to this property in 1910 to the Puget Sound Pulp and Timber Company for 50,000 cash. Well, of course, in 1910, 50,000 cash, you could have brought, what, 50 houses?
The houses were only about $3,000 a piece.
Yeah, so, that was a lot of money.
Got to buy a car for $600.
The best part of that was when my dad started logging, and apparently there was a 20 or a 25 year time limit on logging the place. And after that 25-year time limit was up, say it was 1935, my dad started logging, and of course Puget Sound was threatening to sue them and everything else, but of course it had expired. So old Gramps sold the timber rights for $50,000, put it in his pocket, which is 1910 was a fortune, and they never took one tree. So that was a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
That reminds me of when we had a grant here, and the only good thing I'll ever say about Brian Mulroney, I didn't know there was any good things to say about him, but every once in a while when Canada was running a budget decently, they would scatter a little bit of federal funds among the provinces. And of course, BC is always bereft of these funds because they vote against the government. They got a dumb habit of voting against the government that's in power in Ottawa. In any event, when Mulroney was in, they started a thing called Ferdinand One. And it was a forestry grant. And if you owned 50 acres or more, and there was some timber on it, they would give you a forester to write up a prescription of what was needed on the lands. And they would pay for 90% of the cost of thinning, fertilizing by helicopter, all that kind of stuff. So I got on that. I couldn't believe it. I don't know why a taxpayer would want to fund, say, me and my brother Ronnie, so we could get richer, but apparently they did. So I jumped right in on and I got this. But I sold permits for people to come and cut the thinnings down in the forest, and I sold just tons of them at $100, and they could take 10 cord. And I would bet you that 80% of the people that bought those permits never come and cut one twig. So
I looked at it and I didn't buy nothing off you because I said, I'm not buying that junk. We could go down to Crofton and get real big logs that they were getting. And we cut firewood down there for about 5 years. And then all of a sudden they realized they put a chipper in there and shipped it, and that was the end of cutting logs for free there.
Yeah, well, you didn't buy, but lots did. I couldn't print those permits fast enough. That was the best thing since Briex.
Yeah, but they were little. I don't want to say the word.
Well, yeah, they were little piss bowls.
Yeah,
but I mean that's okay. You don't have to split them, do you?
No, but it's a hell of a lot of handling. We can cut one big block and throw it in the truck.
Yeah, but I didn't have to handle it. They did. So tell me about that was the logging days and the mining days. You did spend some time in the mines.
I worked in the picking tables in Reserve Mine for about a year, and then they shut that down. And then it was all union then, and the union offered me a job back. There wasn't much doing, so I got another job at number 10 mine running a winch. So I was doing pretty good at the winch, and then they put me they weren't getting much production up on top of this four-heading. They were driving it out. It was an air shaft. And I went up there and run the winch, and then the fire boss's kid couldn't run the winch, so he was blaming me. So I knocked him over. Unknown to me, the air doors had to open. So when the rope rider rings the bell, and I let the cars go as fast as they can, just throw the brake off, and it opens the door, and the fire boss was at the door at the time, and it knocked him over. So he come up and hollered and blamed me for it. So that was on night shift, so I just quit at the middle of the night and walked off. Never went back to the mine again. That's the last time I went in the mine. But I went back in the bush again.
Well, I played lacrosse for 15 years and lucky enough to get on one Canadian championship. But Jack, tell us about your lacrosse career.
It didn't last very long. I played cross for 2 seasons. And we played out in the field at the top, Harewood Field, and then we played down at the cricket field. There was, the arena was just getting built at that time. And when I worked at number 10 mine, I donated $10. They took about 50 cents of pay off of it. And every donated to that arena. That's how it got built. They got so much from the government, I think, I'm not sure, but most of it was all paid for by local. And it was the only arena on the island. Victoria never had arena, so anyhow, I never played in it. But I heard a guy playing ball, lacrosse. He cold-cocked me, so my coach was Jack Naylor. They were a big family here. And I said, come on, put me back in there again. Put me back. All I wanted to do was get at that guy, so I got a hold of him, cold-cocked him, and blackballed him from the game all the time. Never did play a game.
You hit him over the head with a stick, did you?
Oh, I hit him with a stick, yeah. Well, what do you think he hit me with? Have you played it, and did you ever hit a guy? How many times did you hit someone?
Well,
4 or 5 times in the game.
Well, I remember one time in the Victoria Memorial Arena, I actually got thrown out of the game. I actually got thrown out of the arena.
Oh.
And I was out in the parking lot with my stick and my strip on, and I thought, oh man, I heard it get thrown out, but I'd have to buy a ticket to get back in. And there was a guy named Majorovich or something, and he was supposed to be a good boxer, but I wasn't impressed. And he always started to fight with me. I always started to fight. And I always beat him, and I thought, that's the end of that. But he kept coming back. And then one day I was in front of their goal, trying to get a pass, and he swung his stick around, the butt end of the stick around, swinging right, like just the shaft of the stick, right at my face. And I ducked. And I thought, that would have taken my eye out, because those days we had no helmet or shield or anything. That would have taken my eye out. And I thought, that's the end of that bullshit. And I got my stick and I beat him like a red-headed stepchild. And I beat the piss out of him, and he was backing up, and I was just giving it to him with a stick. And then a couple other guys got in, I gave it to them. And then their trainer come out, and I gave it to him. And then finally the referees and all the red tennis got into it. And they threw me out, like I said, they threw me right out of the game.
You never used your stick.
But I'll tell you another funny one too. I never got a chance to speak at Spud Morelli's funeral. Spud was a great guy, a real gentleman. And one time after he retired, we were playing in Victoria, Senior B game, and Spud was a coach. And a guy came by, a big guy, I won't mention his name because he's embarrassing anybody, but very big guy, 6'4", came by our bench, and Spud wasn't saying anything, and he came by and he punched Spud right in the face. And of course, they got the big lacrosse gloves on, they got whalebone inside of them, and it's just like getting hit by a sledgehammer. And punched Spud, who had retired. Spud was probably about 55 or 60 then, punched him right in the face. And so I got up and I jumped up in the bench and threatened the guy what I was going to do, and the line change come, and I was going to do this and I was going to do that. And Spud says, come with me right now. And he brought me down to the dressing room, and I thought, gee, is he going to give me hell for swearing and all that stuff? Because he was quite a gentleman. He says, take your strip off real quick. Put my clothes on. Let me give you a stick and a uniform. And he got the uniform, and he got come out, and the next line change, he went out there, grabbed the guy, hauled him down on that cement floor in Memorial Arena, and just beat him silly. And I always thought those days, like, what the hell was a coach doing? Going on the floor. I mean, you can't do that. You just can't join the game.
Yeah.
But I guess the referees and probably the Victoria team thought, the other guy, he had it coming,
Yeah.
And but old Spud, he was a character.
I got to tell you about Spud at school.
I'll watch that pillow.
And I turned around. We got in a scrap, and he beat the hell out of me.
Did he?
Oh yeah, we were maybe 10 or 11 or yeah, he beat the hell out of me, boy. He was strong.
He was tough,
Oh.
like when you look at
He
him.
was like a bulldog.
Yeah, when you look at him, he was not physically that big a guy,
Yeah, but he was strong.
Oh yeah, and he was tough, and he was afraid of anybody. He wasn't afraid of anybody,
Well, he beat me up pretty good anyhow. I never backed down for him, but he cleaned my clock
I
pretty
wonder
good.
what caused the problem.
I forget what it was, but all I remember is he was just built like a bulldog
Yeah,
as far as
yeah.
I was concerned. He cleaned my clock real good.
Yeah, it was a wonderful. We talk about here is men. We talk about grandpas and grandmas and Spud and the gang and that. But my mother, I like the children and great grandchildren that to know my mother was an incredible woman. She came from England her father came here. He was in the British Army in India, and he came out here, and he would be about 45 years old, and he was killed in a mine in South Wellington. You could read all about that history with about 14 other guys. They were all killed when a mine flooded. But my mother, she raised 8 children, and had 10 children born, raised 10. I'm the youngest of them. But my mother was an incredibly hospitable person. If somebody come to the house, like a forestry person or something, and she couldn't stand them. She just couldn't stand them. And some officious son of a bitch. And but she'd always make some nice tea and scones, and she was always the perfect hostess. Always really, really friendly and hospitable with people, even if she couldn't stand them. And I've always thought about that and thought, that raising all those kids, and when I remember her and getting up in the morning, she'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, make a great big lunch, big black lunch buckets full of sandwiches and hot coffee thermoses for my dad and my brothers who were working either in a mill or out in the forest. And then she'd get up the teenage kids and myself, little kid, the youngest one, and big breakfast in the morning and pack a lunch for us to go down to the convent school. And at night, great big wonderful meal and lovely pies and preserves and stuff. And at the last thing at night would be at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. I remember her putting bread in the oven so she could do it all the next day. And then Sundays meant going to church, watching Ed Sullivan, and having not apple pie, but lemon pie for dessert. And it was always, most Sundays her brother would come over, old Rolly, and he'd go fishing down the river, and often as not, he'd get a beautiful steelhead and bring it up for dinner. So she was a wonderful, wonderful woman, and for that side of the family, I just can't say enough about her. And when her father was killed, her brother, Rolly, and the 3 young sisters, she was the youngest, they lived in a tent for about 2 years in this climate. They almost starved to death because there was no compensation for the miners, next to nothing, if anything, and it was really, really tough for those people.
Did you ever set chokers or anything?
Oh yeah. Not for very
on-
bloody long, I'll tell you. I hate that job. My dad taught me something. He said, a man that likes to set chokers, we used to call them wet hens, because you have to get underneath the trees when it's raining and it's mud. We call them wet hens. But anyhow, I hate that job. I just absolutely hate it. And I think the worst pain you could ever get is when one of those choker bells slip, it hits you on the kneecap. Does that hurt or what?
Oh yeah, it really hurt.
It's just a unique pain. It's just a terrible pain. I hate setting chokers, and I used to run a skidder for a long time, and I always had a good guy set chokers behind me. I ran a cat for a long time, having somebody set the chokers. I was faller for about 10 years, and no end of the stories about logging up coast and stuff like that, and almost killed about 12 times. But you know, you just some survive, some don't. But you know, we used to go, and I got a piece of private timber, say for argument's sake, up at North Rendezvous Island, which is about 40 miles of camp up above Campbell River, just below Stewart Island, and we would just erect some rude shelter in the woods somewhere, and go up there and log, and we'd build a great big log boom, and the tugboat would come by and hook onto it, and we'd go home. It took us about anywhere between 8 to 12 days to get 3 or 4 sections of bundles, and once the tugboat, I think it was the Iron Mac, hooked onto it, then it was insured. The brokers insured it, and you could just fold up your gear and go home for 4 days, and 3 or 4 days, and of course the first day or two you would do a little bit of banking and business, and then you bought a whole bunch more groceries, so you didn't get much time off. But I know a lot of guys, they hung around town, home guards we call them, and you know, I didn't spend much time with my kids, but they had a very comfortable house and nice car to ride into school in, nice Lincoln. They had music lessons and dancing lessons and all the rest of it. So you can't be in both places. It always upsets me that some women will say to a guy, "Oh, no, I want to be supported in grand style and that, but you know, you got to be here also." So it's pretty hard to go out and bring home the bacon and stand in the kitchen at the same time, when you say.
Yeah, it's just that I didn't like that catlogging, or so I liked the high lead and the slack lines, and there's more interesting, and there's more challenge to rig them trees and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I learned a lot from one fellow, Bill Warner. He was a German. He had a camp at Deep Bay up there, and he had one crew on the road and one crew going home.
One crew hired, one crew fired, one crew working.
Yeah, I talked to him, and he said, "Oh, they would hire out as a high rigger or a chaser, and they knew nothing." So he says, "I just sent them right back again." He says, "It's terrible, the people you sent." But at Northwest Bay, he got all local people, and they all understood the woods.
Well, I've hired a lot of guys in my life. I probably had 100 or 200 guys work for me over the years, but you know, I've had some pretty good ones. And you know, usually if I see a guy isn't going to make it, I just say to him at the end of the day, you know, that I don't think this is your thing. But I've hired fallers and different things that the first day the other guy said, you know, you should get rid of him. You know, he's no good. And I'd say, no, come on now. The guy hasn't worked for a month or two and stuff. Give him a day or two. Yeah. And I find that some of them after a day or two they can get rolling. But if not by then they're a hopeless case. Yeah. You know, they should be doing something else. I kind of think like in a small way like Jimmy Patterson, you know, if you're the guy that's sold the least cars that month, you could probably be better off doing some other occupation.
Yeah, he got rid of them pretty quick. I think he didn't play with them.
Sure.
That's what happened there in the 30s. If you weren't up to it, and it was all run, you didn't walk, you run.
Yeah. Everything
was run. And if you didn't run, there was another guy on the side of the road waiting to do. He would run.
Well, the old saying was, you know, a highball thing was the grave is a place to rest. Mm-hmm. The grave is a place to rest. You know, you got all those years to lay there doing all the resting you wanted. But when I was in my late 20s on the farm here, the old grandpa's farm, you know, I decided that I was either going to do one or two things. I was either going to go to the States and moved down there and with my cousins. I got some cousins in California, and they're kind of wheeler dealers. You know, they're developing property and different things, buying and selling stuff down there. And I thought either that or I'm going to have to do something here. And I thought, well, you know, nobody really has. Remembering I'm the youngest of the bunch, no one really has tried to start any kind of a enterprise here to get things rolling again. So I thought, well, you know, my grandfather had this place since 1897. My dad took care of it through 2 wars and a depression and fed 8 of us kids. and give us a real good chance education, although we're all too stupid to take advantage of it. We weren't too stupid to learn, we were too stupid to take advantage of it. And they were easygoing. My parents, they didn't push us too hard. But I thought, you got to do something. So I decided I was going to move up here on the farm and then clear land, raise cattle, Christmas trees, timber, and I logged for many years until I decided that I should spend more time with the kids. So I decided to get in the sawmill business, and of course it was so busy, probably spent less time with them than I had if I stayed logging. But it's been really good. The place looks really good. What do you think? Give me your honest opinion. I promise not to be pissed off. What do you think? Have you done a good job or not? Now, you be honest.
I think you've done a hell of a good job. I admire you. And it had to take a lot of guts. A lot of places, I'll bet you had not 2 cents to drive together. When you're in business yourself, you got a sacrifice to give to your other people. And you don't win all the time. I don't care what anyone says.
Well, when I first started running the family business, I started to kick a few in-laws, and as far as I was concerned, they were just had too much to say and I had to kick their ass. But I realized when I went to my dad, when I was about 18, and I said, Pops, you're not getting any younger, and he agreed with that. And actually, he was the same age as I am now when I took the show over, 65. And I said to him, I'll take over. I'll pay the taxes. I will give you X many dollars a year. And if you want me to take over, I will. And I thought he might give me a little bit of like, who the hell are you? I think your cowboy hat's too tight. But no, he was ready. He was tired. He was ready. He said, you go ahead. See what you can do. Give me some good advice. And I took over. And it was great, because I did okay. And I bought my mom so washer and dryer and a new TV and fix the house up, stuff like that. And with what limited money I had, I remember starting off in business. I borrowed $100 off my brother Danny. He gave me $100 out of his wallet to start buying my first load of lumber out of Harmac, and I paid him with the first check. The first check I wrote was for $100. No interest, of course. I gave him.
That's pretty good.
But no, I've always thought of myself as, when you get a piece of mail and the mail arrives and it says Jack Stewart or tenant. I've always thought that's who I am, the tenant. Just a matter of being here, and my grandpa did a good job, my pops did a good job, and if I could make the place more viable, because don't forget, when I was born in 1945, everything since then, as far as I'm concerned, has been a bit of a gravy train compared to what they had to do. They had to fight through a depression and wars and everything else and bad economies, and it's been all pretty good for me. I mean, the logging was great. There's times when I would have cried if I thought it would have helped. There's times when I thought I couldn't carry on another day when the logging was so tough and the conditions and, due to weather or the steepness of the land. But, if you go home and get a good night's sleep, the next day, it's not easy, but it's manageable. So my advice to the future generations is don't make any hard decisions on a tired mind. Think about it for a while. I learned a long time ago that if someone presses you for a decision or you have to make a profound decision, think about it. Go to bed, think about it. Think about it for a couple of days. Don't be pressed by anyone into making a quick decision. It's your life. And don't follow anybody else's, mantra or whatever they go. That's their life. Everyone's unique, and do your own thing.
Well, I was just thinking when you were telling me how good it was. You were telling me you were logging in Nootka Island up there. And you had quite a struggle up there. Tell me about that again.
Well, actually, it was Calvert Island. And that was really, really tough. I decided I was going to get more into the big time logging and bring barge loads of timber out and that kind of stuff. And I went up to Calvert Island, and I had 160 acres of private property that I had the rights to, and we were in Safety Cove. And that I've never seen. You see, I was logged here, the Gulf Islands around this area, but up there they've got muskeg, and it's muskeg quicksand. Same thing to me. I had 2 FMCs, which is actually a tank, an army tank with logging equipment rigged up in a big winch. And they'll actually go on ground that you can't walk on. and we had wonderful timber up there. But there's two things that killed me up there. There was the skid was about 1.5 miles, albeit a bit downhill, and the ground was just like quicksand. We would cut cedar trees down and cut the tops off about 16 inches, and those great big limby tops, we'd put them one on top of another and run over that with that track skidder, and the machine would just go down and down. It was just impossible. Just we took about 1.5 million feet out of there, but anyhow, I had a couple of houses in there I bought, spec houses. I lost them. I lost all my credit at the bank, and I would have lost the farm if it wasn't for a banker that falsified forms for me, and they couldn't grab the land. I remember coming out of there, and I was just absolutely mentally beat, working 18 hours a day up there. And a guy saw me in Port Hardy that knew me, another logger. He said, "You know what you look like? You look like you just been beat up." And I said, "Yeah, well, I have." And I said, "But you know what? This is round one. We'll see what I can do in the next round." So it worked, and I came back and started up again and made her all back again. But boy, that's a tough show up there. That was depressing, working your ass off. You know, I knew a lawyer, I still do, and actually a lawyer, Lloyd Spruill. I like Lloyd a lot. He's in a retirement home now. And he told me one time, he wasn't talking about me, but he said generally, there's only one thing worse than going broke, and that's going broke slowly.
Well, I worked in that muskeg up in the Queen Charlotte Islands and Prince Rupert with the Air Force, and I know what it's like. You'd run a cat through there, and you'd have to drag it through with a winch, then drag your sleighs on, then go drag the cat up further. It's pretty rough ground, and it stinks and everything else with it. Mud, you can't get it off your shoes, your face. I know what you went through.
Well, you know, we would, like I say, we'd get cedar trees, incredibly hairy hemlocks and cedars, and put them in there, and you'd think that would hold it up, you know, but not just like throwing a potato in a bowl of soup, man. That was it. Oh, we had some good times up there, but they were tough times, and we had so many guys. We were living in a boat and a trailer, and so many guys in the boat at night to sleep there because it was warm, you know.
Yeah.
And it was a very, very early spring. It was cold up there, and you know, up by Rivers Inlet, and there were so many guys in the boat that if you wanted to eat, one guy had to sit down so that somebody could stand up to eat. That's how crowded we were in there. Imagine what that smelled like.
No.
Because nobody was having a shower because not too many people wanted to jump in the ocean or in April up at Rivers Inlet.
Well, I've been in that cove a couple of times with my neighbor. He used to gilnet up in Prince Rupert to start with, then follow down. And that's the first stop we made was in that bay up there. Where if you remember, you'll see all them fishing boats anchor overnight in that cove.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to say is that I've had 4 children and 9 grandchildren, and every one of those 4 children of mine have got such a different personality. It's unbelievable. And the 9 grandchildren, the same thing. You know, I didn't think it was 9 different categories of children, but all of them are so absolutely different. It's unbelievable, and I just love them all to hell. I mean, they're just been wonderful kids and wonderful grandkids, just absolutely great little people. I've had so much fun and been so close to them. It's incredible. Right now, at this stage of the game, at 65, the grandchildren are easily the most important thing in my life. And what I'm doing now is I'm going to keep the sawmill going for a year or two, and just to put the icing on the cake, because I like making money. When I was a kid, I went down to work in the bowling alley because that was the only thing available. And I used to work for old Shelby Saunders down there, and we got 5 cents a game for setting a game of a bowling game. And so you had to get 20 games a night to make $1. And in the springtime, when the people weren't coming around much anymore because the weather was getting better, they were doing more outside activities, it was hard to get 20 games in, so you couldn't get $1. So I took a job from him as a janitor, and I had to put all the pop bottles away, make sure they were drained, there's no straws in them, sorted them to what brand they were, cleaned the bowling alleys, cleaned the bathrooms, waxed down the alleyways, and all of that for $1 a night. I did that for $1 a night, and and it was a tough place to work. A lot of bullying going on, and I saved up $40 in the bank. I bought a 22, I bought a sleeping bag, and then they had this big league game one night, and I talked all the other kids into going on strike and screwed them over, and I walked out. And because they were really mean. They were so bloody mean that I used to run my bicycle from Harewood down to where the Great National Building is. That was the old Pygmy bowling alley there. You remember the old dance hall?
Oh yeah, that was
Pygmy Lanes.
that was made of railway cars springs,
Really?
and it sprung on the dance. But
Well, they were dancing. Yeah, well, anyhow, I did that. And the old bugger was so mean that I bring my bike. I wanted to bring my bike in and put it in the warehouse.
Yeah.
He wouldn't let me bring my bike in. I was scared of getting it stolen, you know.
Yeah.
But he's so mean, he wouldn't even let me store my bike in there at night. So, you know, it's I know the value of a dollar, and money's like a knife. You know, you can go and take some of the garden and chop it up and do something, or you can cook a chicken or something, or you can stab somebody in the eye. And money's just like a tool, it's just how you use it. But yeah, what would you do if you had to do over again? You've been a logger, a miner, a general contractor, you built schools, you built houses.
That's hard to say. I regret not having no education. That's my biggest regret. I would have loved more education.
Yeah.
I didn't get no education. I started work at 15 years old, so I never got no education.
Well, you know what? I couldn't wait. I don't regret the education thing. I couldn't wait to get out of school. I only went to grade 10. And I remember the day that I left school. I went to convent school for the first 8 years of my life. And the convent used to be grade 1 to grade 13. That was used to be called university entrance. And I went to that school for 8 years, and all of a sudden, they weren't going to have it from grade 8 to 13 anymore. So I was the first and only child in my family ever to attend public school. So anyhow, I went there to public school in grade 9 of John Barsby, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, every 40 minutes you got up, or every hour, and went to another class. And in the convent, the nun taught us everything. Geography, mathematics, and when she thought we weren't getting enough oxygen going to our brain, she'd just say, here's a soccer ball, get out there and play soccer for half an hour and get going again. And we'd come in, and then we'd talk about things. I remember at the school, the convent, when Fidel Castro took over Cuba, and that was the debate of the day. Is it a good thing that Fidel Castro took over Cuba? And that's, 50 years ago now. So we would say, I'd say, well, I think it is because of so and so. And somebody would say, well, I don't think it is. And you could debate. And if the nun would say something, you could say, well, I don't think that's true. I think that this is true. And they would encourage you to debate, talk a subject to death, and then we'd get on with it. But when I went to public school and the teacher said something politically, which a lot of them did, I'd say, well, that's not true. I think this is true. And they'd say, what? Get out of here, go down to the principal, you're going to detention, you're going to get the strap. And I thought, what kind of a school is this where you can't debate? So one day I was sitting in this class, and the teacher was a nice guy. His name was Mr. Herford, nice man, but I was probably sleeping and drooling on my desk or something. And he said to me, Gogo, why do you come to school? You know, why do you come here? And I said, well, I'll tell you, it's like this. And it was a nice spring day, it was probably around early May, and I was looking out the window, and a beautiful day, and I said, you know what, sir, I said, going to school to me is like being on a train. You know, you just keep going along, clickety-clack, you're looking out the window, and all of a sudden, you see a nice spot. You think, I'll let you get off here. And I says, today is a nice day, and I think I'll get off here. And I got off, left, didn't touch my pen, pencil, paper, eraser, nothing, didn't touch it, just got up and left. Never came back. It wasn't for me. Just like I knew there was a world out there. There was places I'd heard of, you know, and I never got to see it because just a kid. Now's the time to go. Never thought about it. But you can educate yourself a lot. And the old school of hard knocks works pretty good.
Well, I got lots of hard knocks, I'll say that, but the depression made me cautious of everything. I remember I come out of the service and I built a house, and then the car I had was a 1935, and I have 2 kids and a dog in there, and it was a 35 coupe, and they were kicking it out of the gear, so I went down and ordered a car. It took 6 months to get it. When it come, my payments for the house and everything was $75 a month, and I thought, I'll never make this. So I went out and worked nights and days, and I paid that off in 6 months, and I said I'll never do that again, and I never have.
Well, one thing I do is I do keep a lot of gunpowder. That's what we call it when you keep a certain amount of cash stored away. No matter what the opportunity, I always keep a certain amount of cash. The more the merrier, stored away. And I call that dry gunpowder, because if you see something good, you can't shoot it when the powder's wet, right?
Yeah, well, I think someone's going to discover all them tobacco cans all over the field planted there. That's what my grandma done. She planted $20 in a can, and I come over to her place, and she was digging all over the yard. She couldn't find it. It was so many pieces from this way to that way. Anyhow, we spent about 2 hours. We found the tobacco can, and that was $20. That was a lot of money.
Oh, I bet, eh?
Yeah.
Oh, I know. I remember my dad's half brother, George, and George Mitro. When I was a kid, he gave me 50 cents. And I still remember that 50 cents, what a big deal it was to me at the time. But my mother didn't like it because she didn't like George, because he had tried to sue the old man for something one time. But yeah, they're all good. They're real characters. Real characters with real character. Well, speaking of George, a funny thing happened. You know, when he was in the mines, he was one of the strikers. And of course, they were all blackballed. You couldn't get a job in that. And he was taking the train from Ladysmith to Nanaimo. And some of the company guys threw him off the train. Oh, you're a striker. You can't go. You threw him off. And he came back up here, and he was in his late 70s. And he looked the guy up, a couple of the guys that threw him off the train, and he punched him right in the head. Walked up the door. I'm talking 50 years later.
Yeah.
Walked up the door, knocked on the door. The guy come there. He just nailed him. So, you know, they never forget, right? Never forget.
Yeah, them were some bad times, some good times, Mike. Anyhow.
Yeah. Well,
you can think back, and it's so all right now.
Well, we used to make our own fun. My brother Ken, my brother Eddie, and that we worked in Powell River the year David was born, and it was really tough there. And the price of logs got so bad, and this is no baloney, they quit buying them. They did not. It was the only time in my life when you couldn't sell a log. I don't give a damn what you had, they didn't want it. And it was just a terrible market. And we couldn't even give ourselves $3 an hour. We were working up there. But one thing about it, Jack, we learned how to log cheap. I mean real cheap. You know what I'm saying? Everything Jippo, and we got to be real good loggers. And when the market did come back, we did make a lot of money, because we were used to operating on a very low budget.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what low budget is. This is low budget. We go down to there was a tunnel coming under the highway up in Powell River there, and we sit there at night with the flashlight and the pitchfork, and when the fish come through, we'd nail them with a pitchfork, and we had them in a freezer. We pretty well lived on that. And our big treat was once a week we'd go up to the hotel there at the dock, and we'd have a dinner, a Chinese dinner or something. And there was a lady there, and she was an Italian lady, and she really liked my brother Ken. So she'd come over there and sit on his knee and say, call him Big Daddy. And then one of the crew, the young Danny McGifford, he would sneak behind the cupboard, and he'd grab a couple pies and put them in his coat and go out and put them in the truck. So we had pie at least. We couldn't afford pie. And then after a while, we said to her, her name was Edna. Edna, we've been stealing pies here for about a year, and we'd like to bring the pie plates back. And she says, oh, you have not. And we said, yeah, I'm afraid we did. So we washed the plates and brought them all back to her. Of course, didn't mean much to her. She was just working for this big hotel, but that was our big deal, is pie, stolen pie. I guess that's about it.
Yeah. Very nice. Very interesting, Mike.
There's a million stories, but we don't have a million hours. Yeah. Okay, now we're going to end that film, and just happens to come along, Julie and John with Mikey, Angel. So, then years to come, when you're 35, or look at the camera, Mike, when you're 35 or 45 or 55, you'll be able to keep your hands down, like Grandpa just said. When you'll be able to look back and say, look at me, I was just a little teeny kid. So what do you guys think about Grandpa in your young age? So? Gives you some money sometime, does he? What do you think, Angel? Am I nice?
Yeah.
I like you too. Because no. Okay, there they are, these little kids.
Do they know Jack? No?
That's it.
Do they know Jack? No?
What's the Jack?
Yeah. Do they know Jack?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Sure they do. He went up to Jack's house, didn't you? Sure you
He
did.
can't remember.
Yeah, Jack give me some candy, didn't he?
Mike.
Don't be cheeky. Don't
Don't.
be cheeky. You know what I'll do to you? I'll
He's
take
a-
your nibbles.
He's next to Jim Carrey.
Okay, you're a man. Where are you gonna go?
You gonna show him how Popeye fights?
Oh yeah!
Let's show him
Hang
how
on.
Popeye fights.
Hang on. Oh, it's Popeye. Come on, give me Popeye.
Come on, good one.
There he is. Now we got him going here. He's doing all
He's
right
wound
now.
up now.
Hey.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's it.
Brats.
There you little buggers.
You better get your mom in here. I'll get out of here.
gone.
Mommy's get her temperature taken.
You're a clown. You won't behave yourself, will you? I'm making your nibbles.
Bad.
He's a cheeky boy, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's going
cheeky
to
boy.
play.
Where's your dad today?
There.
He's getting wood. He's
Is your dad working today?
playing
Wood, yeah,
hockey,
just
and then he went bike riding, and now he's going to go play tennis, and then
Tennis?
basketball.
Basketball.
Holy
Tennis,
smokes,
we're
he's
playing
busy
tennis.
day today.
Yeah, he's a jock.
What's that tail he's got there? There, he's gonna grow a ponytail there.
Yeah.
Grandpa? Yeah, he's gonna grow a ponytail. How about that?
Mohawk when he stands it up.
Who is playing hockey? Who got a goal?
Oh, did he play hockey, Mike?
Yeah.
Oh.
First a game of my season.
Oh.
His first game with his new team, and they're called the Sharks.
Oh.
Goldfish. They call
That's
it goldfish.
Yeah. They're
They
called
call it
Guppies.
goldfish, Mike?
Look at the sharks.
They call it
Guppies.
Look at the sharks.
You're a nibble.
Then the 9 little kid sharks.
Take that. Yeah, my grandfather bought this property in 1897.
And tell me a little bit about how the property's been used and just your theory on logging, clear cut as opposed to selective.
Well, it's been used for raising cattle, horses, Christmas trees, potatoes, sawmill site here. And my theory on logging is that if you're logging a mountain, and this is an oversimplification, I realize it, but just roughly, if you're logging a mountain, find out where your prevailing winds are. And start from the furthest spot. Let's say if you have a face of a mountain, start in the extreme left or the extreme right, depends on the winds. And take out a strip of timber and then let the timber that's standing next to it reseed that area naturally. It's so much better to have that seed from its natural height. Elevation is very important in reforestation. And then after that, area is reseeded. After say 3 years, take the next strip, the next strip, the next strip, till you get right to the end. And by the time you get to the end, the other trees are about 30 years old, and they're all nice, healthy, standing stems. That's the way to log. It's a little impractical, but not impossible. That's the way to do it. And whatever was impractical, you'd save the money on reforestation and have a better job of it. That's my opinion.
And what's your opinion on development on along the river?
Well, I think that any development is good as long as there's nothing going in the river. I mean, you can have a septic tank, and it could be a tank that's holding, and as long as that water or that the sewage is taken out of that tank and taken to the other end of town and gone through the treatment plant, there's no problem. You don't have to have a drain field. If you have a holding tank, the people that are on the south end of Nanaimo should have the same privilege of developing as they did in the north end of Nanaimo. I mean, all the garbage ends up in the south end of Nanaimo when the garbage dump, and 90% of the garbage is created in the north end of Nanaimo and dumped in the south end of Nanaimo. So I want to see the people in the south end become disenfranchised for developing, as long as it can be contained and trucked to a sewage treatment plant. There's not hurting the elements of the river whatsoever.
All right.
Yeah, I'd like to say something about another thing that the public is not aware of. There is such a thing in this province as the BC woodlot. And what it is, normally, is you get a pioneer family and they have a certain amount of timber. So they have 200 acres of private land. And what they do is they pledge that land for a 25-year period, renewable every 5 years. And the Crown, the government, the BC government, the Ministry of Forests awards them under competition a certain amount of Crown land to administrate. So they become the stewards of their own land and a piece of Crown land. Ideally, if the private land is 200 acres, the Crown gives them 800 acres of land to use. And whatever the annual allowable growth is, if those 1,000 acres grow 50 truckloads of timber a year, then you can harvest 50 truckloads of timber a year. And you have to reforest it, you have to keep the roads cleaned out, the ditches cleaned out, make sure there's no blockages in the draining system to create erosion. You thin out the trees when they're a certain age, you cut out the less desirable species so that the other more desirable, more viable species have got room to grow. And that's a wonderful program. And the only problem is that of all the timber, of 100% of the timber cut annually in the province, only 1.4 of the annual allowable cut goes to the woodlot program, which is ridiculous because people who have woodlots like ourselves, we have local people go in there, build the roads, the culvert systems. We have local people map out the areas to be cut, the cut blocks. We have local people harvest the timber. We have local people yarding and processing and hauling the timber up here. We put that timber through our own mill facility. We use about 50% locally for local projects, about 50% we export. So it's really a utopian situation. It's the the butcher, baker, candlestick maker thing, where the timber is used in the community, the money is spent in the community, as opposed to exporting the jobs with the logs out of the province. I'm not entirely against exporting logs because some species here cannot be cut viably. And I don't see any problem with it. But what the public doesn't understand is there's private timber, like you're looking at here, which we own since 1897. We own this private timber. It has a special status called Old Crown Grant, and we are allowed to export that timber. And also Indian timber is allowed to be native timber, First Nation timber, whatever you want to call it, is allowed to be exported. Because if we've kept this property for well over 100 years and paid taxes through 2 wars of the Depression, why should we be bereft of getting a good world-class price for our timber? They don't stop people from exporting salmon. They don't stop people from exporting coal. They don't stop people from exporting anything. But they do it with the timber because the public's misinformed. And there's no reason why we should get, for argument's sake, $70 a cubic meter for timber like this when we can get 140 by exporting it out of the country, unless you want to subsidize us. And we don't looking for subsidize. We're proud people. We can be viable on our own with minimal government interference.
All right. Did you grow up in this area? Like you grew up on this farm?
I was actually, there was the old family farm, and then they moved down to Harewood. And when I was about 13 years old, my father retired, and they moved back up to the farm here. And it was absolutely wonderful because we'd get dropped off down the road about 3 miles in the school bus, and my brother would meet me with 2 horses, and we would race home. And I remember one time we had a family dinner, and there was 3 boys left in the family, and my mother made this magnificent meal. And I commented at the time that we were eating pork that we had grown here, all the vegetables we had grown here, butter that we had made here, bread that she had baked, and the only thing on the table I could see that we hadn't produced ourselves was the salt and pepper. We even had blackberry wine. So that's great. You talk about eating food that's grown within 100 miles. Try 100 yards.
And so, you got fond memories of going down to the river and camping and fishing and swimming?
There was these gentlemen, and they were gentlemen. There was 2 brothers called the Gregory brothers, and it was called Gregory Brothers Pole. And we'd cut down trees with a dimension of about 8 inches, and we'd cut them down with a buck saw. And we'd cut them into 12 or 13 foot lengths and pull them out of the woods, carry them out, really hard work, put them on this trailer, take them up to the Nanaimo Lakes, and they used them to put on the side of railway cars, flat deck cars, and they put the poles in the side, and they filled the the deck of the railway car with beautiful cedar poles, and that's what held them together, and then they strapped them on the top. And they were really generous guys, and we used to get like $1 a piece for these things. And one day they lent us a brand new chainsaw, Homelight chainsaw, shiny new saw, and all of a sudden we could really go to town and do these things in a hurry. We'd do that, we'd make a few $100s, which was a fortune to us. Then we'd get a whole bunch of canned spaghetti, canned beans, hot dogs, and beer. Not necessarily in that order. Go down the river for 2 weeks and barbecue and drink beer and catch fish and fry them up. And it was a wonderful life. I couldn't have had a better childhood. So much fun with all these buddies.
And so do you have a favorite spot on the river?
Well, I do now. Through some problems years ago, one of my relatives lost a beautiful piece that my dad had given them, and about 10 years ago I bought another piece down the road, about 8 or 10 acres right on the river, and we built a nice cabin there so my children and the grandchildren can go down there anytime and go fishing and swimming, and I got a nice big place for them they can shower up, and a great big sun deck so they can have a nice barbecue and all the grandchildren can be together. So I sort of revived that, and that's a wonderful place to be.
So your grandfather originally had property on the river as well then?
Yes, he didn't actually have property right to the river, but there was no way because of the terrain that anybody could get through without going through our property. So I thought, why would we want to buy it when we control it? Right now we're using it all the time, and we don't have to pay any taxes on it. So I thought that's a good thing. But like I say, through a divorce from one of the brothers, they lost that property. I actually should have bought it at the time, but I thought, I got enough balls in the air at this time I didn't need any more. But in retrospect, I regret not just buying it out and controlling that as well.
All right, anything else you want to tell me?
Yes, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die.
So what do you think about some of the logging practices that have been used up in the Nanaimo Lakes and the Nanaimo River area? Like you see some of the sides of some of those mountains not really growing back too well.
Well, you just can't lay it all on the logging companies or the loggers, because think about everything else. Think about the fishing. When I was a kid, they used to just go down the river and fish that were spawning, the farmers would take them with a pitchfork and throw them into a manure spreader and use them for fertilizer all over the field. That was the mentality of the people at the time. Things have changed. Times have changed. I'm not condoning what they did, but I mean that's the way people did it. There was like no tomorrow. It used to bother me when I was a young fellow, about 15 or 16 years old. I used to go up to Mount Benson and merrily steal Christmas trees off the crown of British Columbia and McMillan Model and everything else. Never felt bad about it, because the trees that make natural Christmas trees are very, very bushy, and they never become timber because the tall, willowy, wispy trees, they outgrow them, and then they choke the sunlight out of the bushy trees. So I never felt bad about it. But when I went up there and got these trees, the bushy trees, we saw cedar trees left on the ground, second growth pole type cedar like that had been left there, just knocked down and left. I mean, the wood was, even at those days, way back then, was valuable wood for cutting the lumber. But if you don't have to take them, anything but the best, you don't take anything from the best. You take people by nature. They go up to a smorgasbord, and what do? They don't head for the broccoli dish. They go for the best cuts, the tenderest things, the prawns, all the expensive stuff. They take that, and the rest be damned. Not only that, but they usually leave a plate full that they couldn't eat to begin with. So it's in the nature of man to be a greedy, wasteful son of a bitch. It's a shame, but it's true.
Okay. You grew up coming up to the Nanaimo River. You want to tell me a little bit about your experience with the Nanaimo River?
As I said, we would come up through Mike's grandfather's properties, right through there. We crossed the bridge, and as we crossed the bridge in the 30s, they put in placer mines. There was 2 of them up here. One just after you crossed the bridge, and the river had a nice bend in it there. And I think they got about 2 bits a week or something for mining it, and it put them out of the way. And then there was another camp halfway up before you hit the South Fork Dam. It come down onto the river, and there was another camp there, a placer mine camp too. Then you carried on to South Fork Dam, and the bottom of the South Fork Dam, they had another camp there, and then people cut trails, and they cut them right through to the Nanaimo Lakes, over the hump into Cowichan Lake, and they done all that work, because that was all the work there was. There was the hungry 30s. So it was quite a rough time, but it was a good time. We survived with it, and it was all right. And everybody, if you got a deer or a fish or something, everybody shared it, because nobody had any fridges at that time. So it was kind of rough, but I didn't, I didn't know any better. So kids, that's the way it went. So it was very good. But there was a lot of fish in that Nanaimo River, and then we used to go up to the Nanaimo Lakes. Emery's had 3 cabins up there, so we'd go up there and spend time there. We made a dugout canoe up there and floated it down the river, and then we would hike up to Fourth Lake. And the fish up there, I caught a fish one time 24 inches long, and had a fish inside of 12 inches. It must have just ate it. And then we would camp there overnight at Fourth Lake, and we'd hike up to a lake called Labor Day Lake. We had to go up the mountain quite a ways, so it was a steep hike. And then we come back down, and we'd go right from there to Second Lake in one day, but 2 days going up and 1 day coming back for Labor Day week. We get a lot of fish up there, excellent fishing up there, because they never got much fishing. The odd couple would go in there twice a year. And one day we were going into Fourth Lake, and a friend of mine was just ahead of me, a fellow named Hogg and Johnny Janes, and we seen them there, and we were talking, and they put their hand over their mouth to keep quiet, so we kept quiet. We didn't know where it was. And then there was a herd of elk feeding in the river, picking up the salt out of the river, eating the gravel and spitting it out. So they were getting something out of it. We thought maybe it might have been some kind of salt or something. But they counted them. We couldn't count them. But they figured there was about 75 elk there in the river.
Now, so you used to go to Fourth Lake before the Fourth Lake Dam was there?
Oh yeah, there was nothing there. There was a cabin at the Nanaimo River about 300 or 400 feet off the river. We'd spend the night there. And then we would, if someone would fall a tree across the river, and if it wasn't, the one night we went across the river, we got there and there was no tree across the river, so we waded across. But we packed a pair of running shoes with us to wade the river, and then when we got across the other side of the river, we had to change our clothes in a hurry because we were damn near froze to death. Your legs were chilly. But then we'd build a raft on the river, and one day I was in with Bobby Emery, and I built a cedar out of cedar bark, a lean-to, and we had a fire going, and we had the raft, and we had a box on the raft, and I heard a noise at night, and Bob got up, and here he is. The bear was eating our fish, and he's up there clubbing this bear, and the bear jumped off the thing, and I'm scared to death. But the bear left, and he got most of our fish, so we had to go back fishing the next day to catch enough fish to come home. But, there's some good times there, but that's what we done when we were kids. We didn't cause any trouble. We hiked all over the place.
So do you remember when they built South Forks and Fourth Lake Dam? And
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that was Harmac built the one on Fourth Lake Dam, and before they done that, they dug a tunnel underneath there to drain the water into the Nanaimo River area, because it was Sadie Creek come out of Fourth Lake down quite a steep hill, so it was quite a bit higher than the Nanaimo Lake. So they dug a tunnel through there, and Eddie Gezzetti's father built he was in charge of the masonry on that dam, and it's an earth-filled dam with a concrete cap. My nephew, he just about 4 years ago, he just resurfaced that dam. He was the concrete finisher on it. So he done that, but that's about all I can tell you. And South Fork Dam, I was just a kid when they built that, and I remember them putting in the pipeline on that when we went up there, and it was a wood stave pipeline, and they changed it to an 8-foot, 16-inch concrete pipe. Installed that, and I have 2 pieces of it in my yard yet from the cover. But that's about all I can remember of that, anyhow.
Right.
Yeah.
You were saying that South Forks Dam, there's no reinforcing steel in it?
There's no steel in that dam whatsoever. And look at the size of it, and the curvature of that thing, how it's built. And they don't need a lot of steel in what they're telling you. They're building houses now and making them put steel in the thing. It's a waste of money.
All right. Anything else you want to tell me?
Well, that's about all I can remember there. I remember his grandfather making mines here. He was going to sue the company for other, because he owned the mineral rights here, and he was putting dams or coal mines in here, and they would go in so far, 20 or 30 feet, get the mine just established to get it going so they could push it in, and the company would hire men to blow the dam up, or the mine up, and so he couldn't sue the company.
Did you ever work at any of the logging camps up on the river or up at the Nanaimo Lakes?
No, I was come out of the service, and I went handyman in Elk Bay after the service, and then I quit. My dad and I started up a business of construction, and I never went back into the thing again.